For 3 years, I worked in City Hall in St. Paul, Minnesota. I have never personally witnessed anything, but City Hall is supposedly haunted. People have reported seeing ghosts dressed in 1920s attire walking around the building, in particular, down in the basement level. My secretary shared this story with me. When I started to work for the city, she had already been a city employee for many years. She told me that she hated going down into the basement, particularly at the end of the day when there was hardly anyone left in the building. She said she always felt eyes on her down in the basement. However, one particular incident happened a few years ago after she began working there that really reaffirmed her fears. One day, she was requested to go downstairs and retrieve some files. It was late on a Friday afternoon, and the only people left in the basement were 2 female file clerks. She got off the elevator and went into the office that she needed to go to. My secretary then got the files from the ladies and wished them a good weekend. Afterwards, she exited and turned the corner for the elevator. Perhaps 20 feet ahead of her was a man dressed in a dark suit. He was wearing a hat and carrying a briefcase and wearing a trench coat. The man kept his head down and walked ahead of her at a brisk pace. He entered the elevator, then stepped to the side to press the buttons, all the while keeping his head down. She said that his hate shielded his eyes. My secretary called out for the man to hold the elevator. The door started to close, so she picked up her pace. She reached the elevator just as the door came to close in the center. This was when she stuck out her arm and stopped the door from closing. The door sensors automatically sprang the doors fully open. However, when she stepped into the elevator, every single hair on her body stood on end. The elevator was empty. I have an American friend who was a part of a Christian group that sent aid and supplies to the Hmong refugee camps during the 80s and early 90s. He volunteered to go over personally and help provide relief to Hmong refugees. They gave people food and medicines. Then, when possible, they would share the word of God. In these camps, he said he saw Hmong people practicing shamanism everywhere. As a result, he saw strange things and even heard about Stranger Things. Not the TV show, don't get it confused. The scariest thing he saw, however, occurred out of the blue. One day, he had been helping with food prep. He wanted to deliver food to an old lady who had been sick. She didn't have any real family in the camp, so he felt bad for her. My friend went to her hut and opened the door. The old lady was laying on the bed, but there was someone else with her. His back was turned and he was kind of hunched over. My friend said hello, and that's when the person turned his head. He then saw what he describes as demonic. The demon had a hideous face and a long tongue. It smiled at my friend. My friend was scared, but he gathered his wits. He closed his eyes and prayed for God to remove that thing. When he opened his eyes, the demon was gone. Sometime later, that old woman died. Interested in sharing your stories? Submit them to HmongChronicles@gmail.com or in the description below. Here is the next story. Thank you. Ever since I was a kid, I wondered about the Hmong Panzong. As Hmong kids, we all heard the spooky stories from the adults. Some probably even used threats of the Panzong to scare us kids into not wandering away during a fishing or camping trip. As a young man, I wondered if maybe this creature was just some kind of new yet undiscovered monkey. The typical description of the Pung is that it is small with long white hair, sometimes black hair. It looks human and has fierce teeth and sometimes claws. To me, that sounds like an animal, but now as an adult, I cannot discount that this creature reeks more of the demonic than the natural. One time, while chatting with my mom, we started talking about the supernatural. She usually does not open up about it because I think my mom is able to see things from time to time and it scares her. On this occasion, my mom told us that when she was a young girl, her cousin was taken away by a bunzong. She said an uncle was going out to gather firewood. He didn't want to enter the jungle alone, so he took his little niece with him. She was only around 5 or 6 years old at the time. They didn't go far into the jungle, but were off at the main trail. He then began cutting wood as the little girl played nearby. After some time, he realized that she wasn't humming to herself anymore. He looked around and panicked. The uncle looked up, and in the trees, he saw a white creature with long flowing hair jumping away on the branches. At that moment, he heard faint voices. He ran towards the trail and saw a small group of Hmong people walking along the trail. The uncle begged for help. They spread out and looked for the little girl but found nothing. He ran back to my mom's village and the adults went to search. Nothing. They then requested the help of a shaman. This was when the shaman relayed to them that the little girl was taken away by a bunzong. Another time, I was traveling with my dad and 2 other men to Washington, D.C. My dad and these 2 other men had been soldiers during the war, and they were all going to D.C. to take part in one of the gatherings they used to stage to garner support for the Lao Veterans Naturalization Act. It was just great to be able to go and just listen to them recount war stories. We drove all throughout the night to arrive in D.C. the following morning. Late into the night, the war stories waned and the subject turned to ghost stories. They all had scary stories to share, but this is the one that I remember about a bunzong. I asked the men if they thought there was anything to the bunzong stories. They all said yes. Then I questioned if they had ever actually seen one. This was when one of the men got really serious and he said that he had. When he was a boy, he was playing hide and seek with his cousins. None of them were older than 10 or 11 years old, so they all played near a house that was right by the entry to a jungle. The kids were laughing and running around, just doing what kids do. Then an old man that lived in the house came out and told them to keep it down. They noticed a big woven basket, the kind that they wear like a backpack to carry firewood and other things, leaning against the side of the house with a piece of cloth covering the top. The old man laughed and told the kids to keep it down as he leaned over to pick up the basket. Suddenly, as he removed the cloth, a little white monkey-like thing jumped out. It had long white hair and red eyes. It bit the man's hand and then screamed as it jumped away into the jungle. The kids stood in shock for a minute, then they all ran away. They told some adults, and later several men had come running to the old man's house. They found him, and he was okay. However, he had a bloody bite mark on his hand. Afterwards, the old man got really sick and nearly died, but they were luckily able to save him due to a shaman. I've heard that bunzong are described as children, not like monkeys, kind of like what you see in the old Hmong movies like No Blood and and stuff like that. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. My parents live in a small town in Oklahoma where the Hmong community is small and everyone knows each other. There was a Hmong lady who had passed away and my dad attended her funeral. My mom didn't want to go because when my dad decided that they'd go, it was already 11 p.m. at night. So my father went without my mom. The funeral was a good 40-minute drive away. My dad came home after 1 a.m. The dogs on the farm were barking like usual, and my dad was on his 24-hour business cell phone with his people. He went into the computer room where he found my mom watching Thai dramas on YouTube. She was supposed to be asleep with my youngest brother at this time because he had school in the morning. Well, my dad wasn't surprised and watched it with her anyways. Soon enough, my baby brother, who was 5 years old, started crying, and my mom rushed by his side as though she was there the whole time. He kept crying and saying, "Mommy, Mommy, where are you? You're not here." As soon as he fell asleep, my mom was getting sleepy herself, so she went into the computer room and told my dad to go to bed, but then ended up watching more Thai dramas with my dad. My baby brother started crying really hard again, and my mom decided that it was time to really go to bed. She was having a very difficult time trying to get him to quiet down. He was crying so hard as though something was hurting him. He cried himself to sleep, even with my mom there. The next day, after my baby brother returned from school, he asked my mom, "Mommy, do you want to know why I was crying so much yesterday?" My mom asked him, "Why? Why is that?" He pulled her towards him and whispered to her ear, "I saw a lady that had short hair like you sitting on top of the dresser. She kept staring at me, and I know that she wasn't you." My mom freaked out and backed up and said to him, "Don't say things like that. You're only going to scare yourself." My baby brother then said, "No, Mommy, really, it was really dark, but I saw a lady sitting there, right there." He points towards the dresser. Later that day, my mom confronted my dad about going late at night and coming back so late. She told him what my brother had said to her, and he said that he was probably just dreaming. And then that's when he remembered the lady who had passed away did have short hair just like my mother's. He also remembered that he didn't put his hands over the burning stove to ward off any wandering spirits. Too bad all the dogs were chained up, otherwise they would have scared off that ghost. A long time ago, when my mom was a freshman in college in 1983, she wanted to be an LPN, or licensed practical nurse. She never finished because she had children year after year, but that wasn't the case. When I was in college, I asked her why she really didn't finish getting her license. She told me this: "Everyone wants to be a nurse or a doctor, but that's not very easy. The education is very hard and you have to be very focused, and when you become one, you have to see blood every day. You will have to take care of the very sick people, in this case, dying people. The thing is that no one tells you about the things that you will see in the hospitals." When I was in school, we had to get up very early for our clinicals. I was one of the few that had to be there by 4 in the morning. One morning, I got up really early and went to the hospital. I was still very tired, almost half asleep. The hospital was empty. The parking lot was empty, and I was alone. I stepped into the elevator to go down to the locker room, which was in the basement of the hospital. I never liked going down there because it was always so quiet that you could hear every little echo of anything that moved. When I got to the basement, I was putting my stuff away in my locker. It was then that I thought I heard voices. I put on my lab coat and then heard little children's laughter as though they were right behind me. I wanted to yell out, but I knew that no one else was there. The elevator door swung open and another nurse walked in. She saw me and greeted me. The nurse quickly grabbed her lab coat and we both went into the elevator together. I told her that I was still very tired and was rubbing my eyes when I saw a little girl with long blonde hair, wearing a white dress, standing at the corner of the elevator, smiling at me. I closed my eyes to get her out of my mind. When I opened my eyes, she was gone. When we reached the main floor, the nurse said to me, "You can see them too, huh? Well, don't be afraid. The basement used to be a morgue. They come out and play every morning. Just pretend that they're not there and you'll be fine." So every morning, when I would go to do clinicals, I would wait for another person to go with me before I'd go down into the locker room. I'd still hear the children and see them every once in a while. I got too scared to become an LPN, and I had too many little ones at home that needed me, so I didn't finish my schooling. Has anyone had the experience where you'd go to sleep at night and wake up in the middle of the night hearing footsteps going up and down the stairs? So I have a pretty big Hmong family, and you'd assume that with so many people in the household, there shouldn't be too many scary things going on. Growing up, my siblings and I always listened to my grandpa and our parents who told us ghost stories. My brothers and I always wanted to catch ourselves a ghost or some sort of monster. We wanted to be little ghost hunters, and we'd always barge into our grandpa's bedroom door right after he had seen a ghost or whenever grandpa was squashed at night due to sleep paralysis. My sister and I shared a room downstairs. The house was a duplex where the basement used to be rented off to other families, but because my family kept on expanding, my parents decided to stop renting it off to people. So there were stairs that led from the upstairs down into the basement. The stairs led to my room, and to get to the other rooms downstairs, everyone would have to go through my room. It all started when my oldest brother would come home at around midnight after his gangster activities. Everyone would be sound asleep by 1 a.m., but for some reason, I would always wake up at around 3 or 4 a.m. hearing footsteps walking down the stairs. They were not quiet either. It was as though someone was wearing heavy steel-toed boots. No one in my family owned those kind of boots. That thing would take about 6 or 8 steps down the stairs towards my bedroom, not even finishing off the stairs, and then all of a sudden end up upstairs in the living room within an instant. I'd be wide awake, chilled to the bones, listening intently to the sound of those heavy footsteps. I'd scare myself all night and then eventually fall asleep. When I woke up again, it would be morning. I'd ask my sister if she heard the footsteps, and she would say that maybe I was thinking too much about the ghost stories, and that's why I was hearing the footsteps at such an odd hour. So night after night, I'd hear the same thing. I was, unfortunately, the only one hearing it, and again, the footsteps would stop at the foot of my door and then end up upstairs again, walking around in the living room. I was afraid that I would hear my doorknob creaking, or that my door would just suddenly swing open, even though it was locked. Those footsteps always seemed to go downstairs and then stop. It never walks back upstairs. One night, my sister and I went to bed a little later at around 2 a.m., and soon enough, the two of us heard the heavy footsteps walking down the stairs. So I told her so, and the next morning, we told everyone in the family. I think my grandfather did a little shy and made whatever that creepy thing go away for good. I'm so glad that I don't hear those heavy footsteps anymore. I am a huge fan of Bruce Lee because of the way of his fighting techniques, his philosophy, and quotes about life and martial arts. I'm so addicted to him that I bought 2 big posters of him. So one night, I fell asleep and woke up to the poster falling. I thought it was weird since there isn't any possible effects that could make it fall. I didn't think so much, so I hung it up again. I laid on my bed, looking at my poster, and believe it or not, Bruce Lee's spirit, or you could say his illusion, crawled out from the poster that fell. Right when it crawled out, I knocked out for some reason, and then had a dream about him. In the dream, the only thing he said to me was, "Son, empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water." It's one of his famous quotes. After that, he disappeared into a mist of air, and then I woke up. It was a weird experience. I wasn't frightened, but to think about it, the way how Bruce Lee crawled out of my poster, it was just creepy. He crawled out like those Hmong ghost ladies that would do such. Yeah, I know, right? It's real, guys. Bruce Lee came to me in a dream.